Yes, welcome into Sports Bet. Betting Insight today, Pauly and Teddy, Thursday, October 5th. Big game breakdown, a lot to get to. 2 playoff games in MLB and the 4 biggest games or 4 interesting games in college football to go over. And that'll be the show today. Play-in game last night, some Rockies money, which is a surprise. Another shootout, favorite over 11-8. A lot of things happen in this game. Diamondbacks, 4 triples, most in a postseason game since 1903. Greinke can't hold a 6-run lead. He couldn't even qualify for the win. As a result, they had to burn Robbie Ray, who went more than 2 innings. Looks like it's going to be Walker tomorrow night in game 1, so they win. But Greinke got roughed up, and they survive at a 11-8 slugfest, just like the AL play-in game.
Yeah, and this is a game where the wise guys really liked the Colorado Rockies. And, we saw Penny closing the D-backs minus 149. BOL was at minus 146. Books that cater to recreational players, they were taking Greinke money, and they did not enjoy last night's contest. But the wise guys took a beating in that ballgame. Because remember, all the money came in on the under as well in that contest. And the wise guys got it half right. Greinke wasn't sharp, but John Gray couldn't get through the second inning. And Colorado's bullpen honestly got lit up worse out of the two. So the books made out like bandits in that one, winning side and total, at least the books that take professional money. But let's not forget Arizona. We talk about looking forward to L.A. I know they burned Robbie Ray. And I know that Greinke wasn't sharp. That being said, the D-backs had a winning record against the Dodgers this year, 11-8, in their head-to-head meetings.
And I would throw that out. That means nothing. All right, to the Yankees and the Indians. Here we go. Tonight, 4:30 Pacific. This is a surprise. It's Bauer against Sonny Gray at BetOnline, $1.35. I'm surprised with a lot of stuff here. I talked to a guy at the Westgate here in Vegas a week ago. He made this series price $260. Now it's $170. And Severino won't go until game 4, if there is a game 4. BetOnline, exceptional customer service, strong promotions, every type of wager you're looking for. Let me get the plug-in. So 135, 8.5 the total. Battle of the bullpens here. You look at this graphic. The Yankees, 3rd in ERA. The Indians, number 1. The Yankee is 2nd in fielding independent pitching. The Indians, number 1. And the Yankees, number 1 in WAR, the Indians, number 2. So it's going to be Gray, Sabathia, Tanaka, and Severino. Francona is going with Bauer, who was great in the second half. Then it's going to be Kluber, so he can pitch on his usual 5-day rest and bring him back game 5 if necessary. And then it's going to be Carrasco in game 3. $1.35 for a team that won 102 games with a hot pitcher and closed the season 34-4.
It sounds to me like you like the Cleveland Indians at the relatively cheap price. And no question, we've seen a dramatic adjustment in what these series odds would have been versus what they actually are, based on the Yankees being hot, based on Bauer starting game 1, and based on an overall shift in market perception towards the Bronx Bombers. Let's talk about the decision for Terry Francona to go with Kluber in game 2 and not throw his ace in game number 1. Quote, I think on a number of reasons, it makes good sense. Not that you go into a game thinking you're going to lose, but if you do, you have your ace coming back. The biggest thing was keeping him on his 5-day schedule. That was really important to Kluber. That was really the only way we could do it. Again, you don't want to put the cart ahead of the horse, but if you're fortunate enough to win in 4, you can have your ace ready for the next series. So, it makes sense to Francona, and I don't say that it's a nightmare with the way that Bauer pitched over the second half. We know this is the guy who the markets have liked a whole lot. He's shown the potential. And over the second half of the campaign, Trevor Bauer has been able to put it together. So I'm with you, Pauly. I think it's a cheap price to support the Cleveland Indians.
I don't know if Sonny Gray's good either. 27 starts this year, 10-12 with a 3.55. 11 starts with the Yankees, 4-7 with a 3.72. And he went 1-2 with a 4.86 against the Indians. We'll find out if he's up to the challenge here against the big boys on the road. I'm surprised Girardi went with Sonny Gray in game 1.
Well, there's not – I thought he'd go with Tanaka, to be perfectly honest. But Sonny Gray is a guy that the Yankees picked up. They paid a high price for. He has ace-level stuff. Let's see what he can do in the postseason. Obviously, he wasn't great with the Yankees, but he certainly wasn't getting lit up on a game-in, game-out basis. It wasn't like Sonny Gray was going out there and getting bombed every 5 days.
All right, up next, the Cubs and the Nationals. Cubs, the Nationals, $1.35 series price. Game one supposed to be Hendricks against Strasburg. It's Friday night. Cubs get the game in prime time, not the Yankees. Scherzer did not throw his bullpen session on Wednesday because of the hammy issue. Might not be available until game 3 at the earliest, and that looks like it's what it's going to be here. It came a little bit lower as a result of Scherzer. And listen, the Cubs had the best record in the second half. They had the number one offense. They were number one in runs scored, and they were number 2 in run differential in the National League. The pitching was shaky, but they were led by their offense. Remember, they were under 500 and were 5.5 back at the break. Then they took off in the second half.
Sure. And of course, if you think about the concept of having to face Scherzer and Strasburg 4 times in a short series, it's certainly an issue. However, when now you have Scherzer who couldn't throw his bullpen, who's still dealing with that bad hamstring, here's a quote from Mike Rizzo, the GM, quote, "We haven't made the decision of when we're going to pencil Scherzer in yet as far as where he's going to pitch in the rotation here in the playoffs. Suffice it to say he's going to pitch in the playoffs here against the Cubs. It just depends on how he feels for which game we're going to implement him in." So Scherzer's looking at 1 start at the most, and there's a prospect that he may not be at 100% when he does go. So the book's forced to adjust down. I don't know, Pauly. I mean, I'm not looking at the Nationals as a team that deserves to be favored over the defending champs. Not even maybe, even with the starting pitching edge. But we know, we've been talking about it all year. How are these lines set? They're set based on projected starting pitching matchups. The markets like the Nationals starting pitching more than they like the Cubs starting pitching. Hence, the price tag for Chicago, or for Washington, I should say, in this series as the chalk.
Never won a playoff series either. That's cause for concern. Madden, terrific job this year as well. I'm surprised it's going to be Hendricks, Lester, Quintana, and then Arrieta, no Lackey. And we'll see. That's not in stone with game 1, but it looks like it'll be Strasburg as well. College football up next. We'll start with Michigan State and Michigan, and we'll get to Washington State and Oregon in the big games. 4 big games to get to coming up next on SportsBit. Betting Insight today on SBRpicks.com.
Go to SBRodds.com. Browse, compare, and shop live odds available at top online sportsbooks.
Back on SportsBit, Betting Insight today. Big game breakdown rolls on. College football. Check out the bonus page Sportsbook Review for the latest and best offers to open a new account today. Michigan State and Michigan. A lot of Sparty money. Michigan down to 10. And 40 is the total. You've seen some action on the under as well. D'Antonio's been great. It's Michigan, especially as a dog. Series 1-1 between Harbaugh and D'Antonio. Sparty 2-0 ATS and beat the spread by 27 points. Michigan with more time to prepare. Michigan State with the win against Iowa at home. Spate is out. It's going to be O'Korn at quarterback. And we'll see if there's an edge at all. Some people think I think he's a better quarterback than Spate anyways. Here's the graphic. Spate has 81 attempts, completion percentage of 54%, 7.2 yards per pass. O'Korn, 27 attempts, completion percentage of 70.4 and 11.4 yards per pass. Harbaugh, John's done a fantastic job, I think, ever since he got here. And every role he's been in, he's acquitted himself very well, including coming off the bench, leading our team to a victory. I think that speaks volumes. Is this an upgrade that they change quarterbacks?
No, of course it's not an upgrade. And the markets know it. And if you look at the step card stats, a very short sample size. Spates is check down Charlie. Okay, Spates is the type of QB that isn't going to make a lot of big plays, but isn't going to cost your team the game. O'Korn's the other end of the equation. O'Korn is going to take shots. He has a bigger arm. He's going to fire downfield. He's also going to throw more, let's call them high variance throws than Wilson Spates. So he may put up some big numbers, but he's also more liable for something akin to a meltdown, shall we call it. So I'm not going to say that Michigan is better with Spate. Spate won the job, and he won it fair and square in camp. And Harbaugh got a pretty good eye for quarterback, picked Wilson Spate over O'Korn. No, it's not an upgrade. That being said, all right. Michigan left tackle, Mason Cole, quote, "Just keep on keeping on. Things are fine. With John moving in the quarterback, it's effortless. We knew the talent John had. We knew we'd get the job done if he had to go in, and he has." So I'm not talking about a downgrade for the Wolverines, but I'm certainly not talking about an upgrade for Michigan. But the biggest factor in my mind These are really young teams. I don't think people realize how young Michigan and Michigan State are this year. We're talking about a squad. They have 22 starters, right? Both teams, 12 of the 22 starters are either freshmen or sophomores. Young squads.
All right. I think as an upgrade at the quarterback position, coaches make mistakes all the time. Look at Houston. Watson was the backup to Savage. How bad does that look? Now with Michigan State, their quarterback Lewerke, 963 yards passing, 8 touchdowns, 250 rushing, 2 touchdowns. That's good news. Bad news, he leads the team in rushing. No one else can step up. You look at their rushing attack. Scott and Holmes, 3.7 yards per carry and 3.9, plus Scott had a 44-yard run. You take that out, it's a 2.9 per attempt on all the others. And Michigan shuts down the run.
Sure. I mean, from a matchup standpoint, it's hard to picture Michigan State moving the football up and down the field against that talented Wolverine defense. But Sparty's 3-1, and the one game they lost to Notre Dame by 20. They outgained the Fighting Irish in that contest. So the markets, you talked about the markets moving towards Michigan State as a knee-jerk on the quarterback. I think the markets are reacting to the fact that Michigan State has outgained every opponent this year, and their statistical profile looks pretty solid. Hence, the Michigan State Spartans money.
Game number 2, bet online. Stanford, Utah. Stanford on the road, 5.5, 50.5 the total. Little Utah money here. We've been telling you how good Bryce Love is, but he was right there with McCaffrey. He might have even been better at the running back position. He's averaging 11 yards per carry. He's on pace to break Barry Sanders' records. He's had at least one run of more than 50 yards in all 5 games. Here's Love, quote, "I try to take pride in seeing things before it happens, being able to read blocks and taking it to that second level of seeing blocks that haven't really happened yet. Trying to set things up like that is big with me, and we'll see if they can continue." Whittingham, listen, Utah's terrific in terms of fundamentals, and they don't beat themselves, and they're usually tough against the run and have a solid defense. Easier said than done here, but they are at home in this one. Listen, Christ had 70 yards passing in that loss to San Diego State. Then they came back and scored a lot of points and beat Arizona State and had the UCLA game as well. Where are you at with the Stanford quarterbacks?
All right, there's so much to talk about in this game. And let's start with the line, because this line stood out to me right from the get-go. I'm like, man, Utah, no respect for Utah. But we saw the same thing a couple of weeks ago when Utah played Arizona on Friday night. That line's only 3. And we're all going, why is it only 3? Why is it only 3? It's clear that the broader markets have Utah power rated at least a notch or 2 lower than most of the folks that I know do, because everyone that I talked to around town this week said this line is a little bit high. I figure Stanford 3, 3.5, and it comes, in the 5.5, 6. As you mentioned, a little bit of Utes money. Then we talked about Bryce Love, and yeah, it's a sports bit pat on the back. We talked about Bryce Love before the first game of the season, said this guy's as good as McCaffrey. You know what he's been? Better than McCaffrey. Look what he's done, 11.1 yards per rush this season, Pauly. And look at that, not just this year. His career, 2,093 rushing yards at 9.1 yards per attempt. There's no way to look this up. There's no database that I can go back and check this, but he might be the first back in NCAA history to be averaging better than 9 yards per carry over 2,000 yards. It's incredible what he's done. But there are certainly issues at the quarterback position. Now, Keller Christ stinks. He's back after missing the game against Arizona State. But, KJ Costello, in my mind, is the better of the 2 QBs. I don't know yet what Shaw is going to do. Here's his quote from David Shaw, the Stanford head coach. "The one thing that I don't do, which multiple people know in this room, is I don't sway with the wind. We've had quarterback situations before. We're going to play our style of football. We're going to play it well. The guys that earn the right to play will play. But as of right now, you should expect to see both quarterbacks in some fashion." So maybe a little QB shuffle for the Cardinal on Saturday night.
I would say Burns stinks. And remember, they had that 7-game winning streak with Christ, although, as I mentioned, he was horrible against San Diego State when he only had 70 yards passing. So we'll see what Shaw's up to. Playmaker, their own at quarterback. At least they have a playmaker with Huntley. I was surprised he beat out Williams for the job. He's completing 73% of his passes, 8 yards per pass, 208 rushing yards, and 3 touchdowns. I don't know about this team, though. They haven't beat anybody. They haven't played anybody. They beat Arizona on the road. They beat a bad BYU team on the road and only won by 6. Other than that, it's been cupcakes. So it's a big step up in competition for Utah.
And in my mind, it's a fairly simple handicap. If Bryce Love is going to run wild, Utah's not going to cover. If Bryce Love, Utah's defense can stop Stanford on the ground, they're alive not just to cover, to win the ball game. But the Utes have some offensive issues. Make no mistake about it. You talked about what a playmaker Tyler Huntley is, but I like they have one weapon on the outside in Darren Carrington. He has 4 touchdowns, 485 this year. But we think of Utah as a team that likes to ground and pound on the ground in the trenches. They don't have that this year. The sophomore Zach Moss, the running back, he's been okay, 4.6 yards per carry. But this isn't a team that's been able to control games with the ability to run the football. And that's a problem against a team like Stanford, because you need to have some semblance of control over the line of scrimmage, or the Cardinal will eat you alive. One thing that works in the Utes' favor, and something we don't talk enough about here on SportsBit, and I know the mainstream media doesn't ever talk about at all, special teams. And the Utes have elite special teams. The place kicker, Matt Gay, he's 14 of 14 in field goals. He leads the nation in scoring, although the fact that he leads the nation in scoring says there's too many field goals, and the lack of the power rushing game is hurting them in the red zone. And the punter, Mitch Wisnowski, the reigning Ray Guy Award winner, he's averaging 46.8 yards per punt so far. And Utah for the season, net punt returns allowed, -1 yards. The Utes will have a special teams edge against just about every squad that they play.
Washington State, Oregon, and TCU, West Virginia. Fort Worth gets game day coming to town. It's coming up in the play of the day on SportsBit. Betting Insight today on SBRpicks.com.
Research before you bet. Be sure to check out SBR Picks for the best game predictions, breakdowns, and much, much more.
Back on SportsBit, wrapping it up, Pauly and Teddy. Big game breakdown rolls on. Always sponsored and powered by BetOnline. Exceptional customer service and strong promotions. Every type of wager we're looking for. Washington State and Oregon, they're playing games with this one. They were dogs, and now Washington State 2.5 on the road, 61.5 the total. Leach is 5-0 against Oregon with Washington State. He's beat the spread by 79.5 points. 2 of those outright wins as big underdogs. I don't know what's going on. Now, Herbert's out, we know that. The backup got hurt against Cal. The third-string quarterback came in. They still moved the ball. And Freeman left with an injury. And the frickin' game still went over the total, which I'm still steaming about. So Washington State, it's not the typical Mike Leach team. Let's throw it 70 times a game. They run the ball well. They have a good defense. But I've been going against Washington State every week. I don't know how good they are. They had the big win against USC, and USC had 3 offensive linemen out. I can't get the Boise State game out of my head when they led by 21 in the fourth quarter against a backup quarterback and a below-average Boise team. But this is their first road game. Amazing but true. Finally, they get a game away from Pullman.
Okay. So much to talk about with this one, too. That's why I love these good games to analyze, because there are a lot of talking points and a lot of things to consider if you want to make a bet. This is not a pick show. This is an information show. We do a play of the day at the end of every contest. People want it. At the end of every show, people want plays of the day, and I understand. You want to know where our money's on, what plays we like. It makes sense. But the crux of the show is about teaching you to fish, not giving you a fish. It's about the concepts that we're looking at as we analyze these games. And the first concept is Mike Leach has had no tactical problems against the Ducks. When you're 5-0 ATS, when you pull 2 outright upsets, and when you're covering by more than 2 touchdowns a game, you certainly are not at any kind of a tactical disadvantage. Leach has owned this Oregon team. But does that change with Willie Taggart now leading the Ducks? You asked me about the QB position. Herbert's not going to play for Oregon this week. The 5th-year senior, Taylor Alley's a likely starter. He's not very good. He's, when you have the 5th-year senior that's never been the starter and isn't going to be the starter and then gets the backup, and is forced into the starting role, there's a drop-off. The true frosh, Braxton Burmeister, is the guy with the upside here, and he's been splitting rips. The senior Alley and Burmeister have been splitting rips and reps in practice this week. So I wouldn't be shocked to see both guys get on the field. Now, one thing that works in Oregon's favor, they have a defensive line coach, Joe Salvea. He's been with Washington State for the last 5 seasons. So they just plucked a coach off of Leach's staff that'll help them on the DL. Here's Taggart talking about his defensive line coach. Quote, he can tell us about personnel and some of their guys. I wish he could play. Then he'd really help us if he could suit up and go out there. He can't do that. So we will have to rely on our defensive line, rely on him doing a good job coaching our guys up this week and having them ready to play. You tell us about personnel, but it comes down to our guys executing what we do.
So I mentioned it earlier. It's their first road game. 50 are seniors. There's 15 of them. They're ready to go. They've already won at Arizona, Arizona State, Cal, Oregon, Oregon State, Stanford, UCLA, USC, and Utah in their careers. The only Pac-12 schools they've not beat on the road are Washington and Colorado, and they're 15-7 ATS on those road games in that span. It's not a typical Mike Leach team. They lead the Pac-12 in time of possession. They're running the ball, and it's also short passes with Falk. Morrow and Williams have 81 carries for 466. They always tell me to respect the odds maker. Oregon opened a favorite. Now Washington State money, they're 2.5. It's certainly got a letdown spot written all over it after they beat USC on national television.
It does, and especially when you talk about leaving Pullman for the first time this season. And it's not a Cougars squad that's going to win every game. You know, they're not going 12-0. That's not how Washington State's built. Leach's teams have never done that anywhere. They've been very competitive, but they're not going to win every ball game. That being said, we're also looking at a different price range from Washington State. You talked about that great success on the road, 15-7 ATS in those road games. The majority of those, they've been dogs. In this series against Oregon, they've been dogs. Now the role has changed for Washington State. The markets are respecting Washington State more than they have. So even with all those road wins, and look, the only way I can look at this game is towards the Cougs. I do not want Oregon in this contest. I'm a Mike Leach believer. And we know, you talked about those straight up wins on the highway. It's not just covers. When you win at Arizona, Arizona State, Cal, Oregon, Oregon State, Stanford, UCLA, USC, and Utah, you know, that's a confident group of seniors. But it's a lean for Washington State. I have not gone to the betting window and put the Cougars in my pocket, and I probably won't. If they go off as a chalk, which I expect they will.
Last one, sponsored and powered by BetOnline as always. Game day going to Fort Worth. TCU 13.5, 68.5 the total against West Virginia. This will be a shootout. West Virginia can't stop a nosebleed, and Greer's a good quarterback. They'll move the ball. This is a great story with TCU. It's a Gary Patterson defense like he's used to. They had the big win in Stillwater. Revenge for the beatdown on the road last year, 34-10. Patterson's rebuilt his defense after a bad year, but Kenny Hill has turned it around at quarterback. The big recruit to A&M then lost his job, transferred out of there like a lot of quarterbacks did after he was a disappointment. Last year, completed 61% of his passes, 17 touchdowns, 13 interceptions. This year, completing 72%, 9 touchdowns, 3 interceptions. He's supposed to get Hicks back, the running back, and the man who's been key is Anderson, who was great in the win at Stillwater against Okie State. 420 yards, 6.2 yards per carry with 6 touchdowns. They dominated the line of scrimmage in the road win against Oklahoma State. Very impressive. Let's see if they can keep it up. And they're going against another good quarterback here in Greer.
Sure, but I mean, your days of finding great value with TCU have come and gone. The market's all over TCU. You know, look at this price range on the against the Mountaineers, and some of it's anti-West Virginia, but TCU came into the season a little bit undervalued. That's no longer the case. Don't underestimate what this means when you talk about, game day coming to Fort Worth. This is a big, big deal to these kids. The safety, Nico Small. That's every kid's dreams. You watch game day, you see the great teams play. You want to be a part of at least one of those teams. So this is a huge game for the home squad. Are they big enough for it? Are they old enough for it? Are they capable of the level of maturity that you need to handle some of these big situations? Certainly in the baseball playoffs, we've seen the young pitchers have some struggles in these spots. And we could see a TCU situation where, they make a few more mistakes than they're used to because of that attention. Also, you talked about the fact they get Kyle Hicks back after missing a couple games. They don't need Kyle Hicks, man. Darius Anderson's been every bit as good, if not better, so far this season.
And Greer's lived up to the hype, the Florida transfer. 13 touchdowns already, 2 good running backs with Crawford and McCoy. 9 touchdowns combined, and they're both averaging more than 6.5 yards per carry. The bad news, as I touched on earlier, is the defense, which has been horrible, especially against the run. 114th in the country, 226 yards per game, allowing over 5 yards per rush. And outside of Virginia Tech, when they had that Sunday night game to start the season, they haven't played anybody. How bad is it? The only true road game against Kansas. Kansas dropped 34 points on them, 560 yards, and almost 400 on the ground. What's going to happen against TCU if you can't stop the run? You're going to get carried out in a body bag.
Sure, and it's an interesting handicap. Again, the only thing I can look here is towards the chalk. Just like the same thing we talked about in the Washington State-Oregon game. I don't want West Virginia plus the points in this contest. I would only want the favorite. I would only want the motivated favorite off that revenge in a revenge spot from last year. But I do worry about the price here, a little bit inflated. At under 2 touchdowns, TCU still the only way I can look.
All right, great day of sports tomorrow. We have 4 playoff games in MLB, and we'll get to the marquee games in the NFL, a loaded sports bit coming up, and we recap what happens tonight in MLB. Louisville, NC State, and the Patriots and the Buccaneers. Series price, play of the day, money time. Back to the Cubs. What are we doing?
Let's go. Betting number 839, because it's not a game. It's a series price. The Cubs at BOL plus 115 to beat the Washington Nationals. Look, this is the exact crux of this wager. The defending world champs cannot be dogs versus Dusty Baker. Period. Joe Madden's minus 200 in this series in a 5-game matchup against Dusty. I understand Washington's got the starting pitching. I think Chicago is the team to beat in this series. Cubs plus 115 over the Nats. That's our play of the day. And again, that's a series price, not a game 1 wager.
All right, plenty of info there. Loaded show coming up tomorrow and a loaded show today. Tell your friends. Thanks for watching. Thanks for the uptick in views on SportsBet. Betting Insight today on SBRPicks.com.